but yeah.
Heaven's Gate was local. It was San Diego.
Yay!
Yeah, guys, let's go.
Hi.
You're right.
Heaven's Gate's actually an interesting cult because it seems that that Heaven's Gate was occupied by true believers, and I mean that like even the guy who led it, what was his name? Applegate, like that. He was Apple something. I should know this. It was a couple, and it seems that they actually were true believers. The woman died, and it left just the guy, and he was kind of like trying to figure out because they kind of presumed that they would both kind of be taken up into heaven. And so when she died of cancer, like it never seemed to even occur to them that she would actually die of cancer. To them, it was more like she has stage 4 cancer. She's only got so much time to live, so therefore, wow, we must be getting taken up really soon. Because if she only has 6 months to live, then that means that we're not going to be on this planet for more than 6 months. They thought that the end was coming, that quickly. So then when she actually passes away, he struggles with this idea of how is it possible that we were wrong about all of this. And so he struggles with this, apparently, with this group for a long while. So Heaven's Gate is one of those groups that they almost blur the lines between cult and religion. Because they seem to be true believers. Nobody was held against their will. Nobody was forced to do anything. Everybody in the group did this stuff by their own will. In fact, if anything, they were exclusionary. At first, they tried really hard to recruit people, and then once they had a group, they weren't trying to bring new people in. They were trying to almost like keep people out. And they had a really strict code of discipline. And if you violated it, you were just kicked out of the group. You weren't beaten and all that. You weren't forced to stay there. You were just kicked out. They said you couldn't come back. And you'll see interviews with people who were kicked out. One guy I'm thinking of specifically, and he's lamenting it, and he's saying that he still feels tremendous guilt and shame even after the suicides, that he wasn't there for it, that he had been kicked out of it, and he missed his opportunity to go into heaven with the rest of his friends. And so they're an interesting group. I'm fascinated by cults. In fact, my 12th graders, every year I say I'm going to teach a section on cult leaders and cults. We just never seem to get to it, unfortunately. I don't know, that might be a course in and of itself. But yeah, when you look at cults, there's oftentimes, like in the case of Joaquin Garcia, if I'm not mistaken, the things I've seen anyway, he doesn't seem to be a true believer. In other words, because we can see people who have like some really crazy ideas, and I mean crazy, to us they seem crazy anyway, and yet there are and so we might think like, oh, there's no way they believe that. People will believe some significant things. When you look at someone like David Koresh, the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, David Koresh seemed to be a true believer. Everybody who interacted with him seemed to think that he really did believe the thing that he was saying. It reminds me, because a lot of these Christian cults, there's a passage in the Bible where they're talking to Paul, who's one of the apostles, and the governor says to him, because Paul is an academic, he's essentially today he'd be a university professor, and someone says to him, Paul, I feel that much learning has made you mad. In other words, you've learned so much, you've gotten so deep into some things that I feel like maybe that's made you crazy. Because they're trying to explain how it is that this guy who was incredibly educated could believe this thing which was emerging called Christianity. And so that was their explanation. Paul, I fear that much learning has made you mad. You learned so much that you've gotten so deeply into some ideas that you must be crazy. And he shuns this idea. And he's got these great lines because he's imprisoned at the time. So he's got these great lines where he kind of just lays out his case for why he believes in this religion. And the Governor Time says, wow, that's an amazing way that you explain it. You almost convinced me to become a Christian. And he's got this great line where he says, I wish that everyone would become just like me. Well, except for these chains, because he was in chains, And so there are these folks who will believe fantastical things, and whether they're right, whether they're wrong, that's for a theology class to discuss. For us in rhetoric and argumentation, it's worth noting that people can be convinced of things. And we tend to think that if anyone thinks something that's outside the mainstream, then they absolutely must be wrong. You know, they must be crazy. They must be, you know, they must be getting tricked. You know, I mean, think about like in the case of the cult that you're talking about, where if the leader is not a true believer, they're certainly surrounded by people who are true believers. And so if that guy were to die, and one of the other ones were to take over, then the cult would be led by a true believer.
It was led by a family. It was his father, then him.
Yeah, but he was arrested, right? In, like,
Yeah, he was arrested.
3 years ago,
I'm pretty
like
sure it wasn't-
2019 or something like that.
I'm pretty sure it was like either his brother or something that took over. So it's still like directed by the family.
And so I wonder almost now if it's being led by someone who is a true believer. And I wonder if that's the line where we transition from cult to religion. In other words, is it started off by someone who just kind of starts it off, and maybe they're a true believer, maybe they're not, but then it gets taken over by people who are true believers, and that's when it becomes a religion. I don't know. I think maybe you might see some shifts in behavior and theology at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten to that point of, it's gotten as far as to say that I can't even like really reveal myself to my own family because I know they just would immediately be like, you're not, like, you're gonna go to hell or something. So, I just kind of like accepted it at this point.
You ever wonder if they're right?
I mean, if they're right, it's gonna be a hell of a party.
So to speak. No, it's the truth. I mean, you ever think about stuff like that? Like, you think of someone like a flat earther. Even if you believe it's stupid, crazy, or just ask yourself, like, God, what if they're right? Wouldn't it be interesting?
It would be so funny.
Yeah, you think about, like, any kind of an idea to us that just seems so far out there or absurd or whatever. Ask yourself, wouldn't it be interesting, though, if they were right? You know? And they try to warn us all along. Imagine if we die and we're floating around out there in space, and we see the Heaven's Gate group going by in a spaceship, and we're like, damn it.